So affective computing is computing that relates to, arises from, or deliberately influences emotion and other affective phenomena. So in the beginning, it grew from ideas about what does it mean for a machine to be intelligent, and not just intelligent in a mathematical and verbal sense, but intelligent when it interacts with us. And that involved skills of what's come to be known as emotional intelligence. And you can imagine computers are pretty bad at that in the early days. We've also gotten very interested in not just machines being intelligent, but in technology that helps us better understand and communicate human emotions. And so the work now has a whole branch that addresses supporting the communication of human emotional information. You know, in the beginning, we kind of wished there was like a cable you could plug into your brain or into your gut brain or something. Yeah. Well, this was before Matrix, and read out your feelings. And that doesn't exist. And actually, I don't know about you, I breathe a sigh of relief that that doesn't exist. But what we find is that there are lots of ways that we read each other's emotions. And some of those are accessible to machines now. For example, we read each other's facial expressions. We listen to each other's vocal changes. We read each other's posture and gestures. And we read how that is synchronized or not. And all of that together helps us to start to infer what might underneath be an emotional state that's driving those observations. Sensor captures three signals: the skin conductance, which is an electrical signal on the surface of the skin that measures, that changes when your sweat gland, picture your sweat gland kind of like a test tube, and as it starts to fill with sweat, the conductance across the surface changes. So even when you don't feel sweaty, the electrical properties change across the surface of the skin when the gland gets innervation from the nerves, and these particular nerves are innervated by the sympathetic nervous system. The skin is the only organ we know of that is purely innervated by the fight or flight system, the sympathetic nervous system. So it's really kind of the purest non-invasive measure we can get of when things activate you, whether good or bad. And so it's measuring the skin conductance, that sympathetic fight or flight or positive arousal measure. It's also measuring motion, so it's picking up my gestures, 3-axis accelerometer, and it's picking up skin surface temperature, which originally we put in because we were studying sleep and we were noticing the skin conductance changing wildly during sleep, and we thought maybe it was sweating and heat, and it turns out that it's not correlated with temperature, which was quite interesting, and now we can see other interesting things with temperature. Originally, these were always measured in a lab, you know, and you'd do things like bring a person in and say, okay, after we wire you up, usually these have lots of electrodes and wires on your body instead of a little wristband, and they'd tether you to this apparatus of equipment and say, relax, you know, and you're like, oh man, I hope I
like sitting in an electric chair.
Yeah, exactly. And then when you relax, your skin conductance goes down like this. And then they'll do things like, you know, clap in your ear or a loud sound or a flash of light. And these are things that provoke your startle response or your orientation response. Quick, and within usually 1 to 3 seconds, your skin conductance will go up, and then it will go slowly back down. Now, that's a pretty robust phenomenon. What we were able to do when we made this something that didn't tether you to a rack of equipment is go out in the wild and start to measure audiences and children on the autism spectrum and kids with sensory disorders and kids with epilepsy and a whole lot of other situations. And regular professors and their stress levels. And then we started to see a bunch of surprises that we could never see in the lab before. Did you see the movie 2001? Space? Yeah, okay. Yeah, I mean, that was a classic when I was growing up. A lot of kids these days still haven't seen it, but there's a scene in there where Hal says to Dave, take a stress pill, right? And, you know, it's done in kind of a calm way there, but there are, I mean, in our life today, when you say to somebody the equivalent of take a stress pill, you know, you better be a good friend before you tell them that, right? That's not really appropriate in most situations. At the same time, we do use our friends and music and food and other things to successfully co-regulate and manage our emotions. So I think we can use technology to help us manage our emotions. But I don't think it's appropriate to just have it like bark at you, like, oh, you're stressed, I'm gonna switch the music in your car to something soothing and make you even more stressed, right? I think it needs to be very, very carefully thought out so that the stress doesn't escalate. I think it's so important to have people who really understand and respect, human feelings, what does it mean to be human, and recognize that while technology is trying to sense some of this emotional information, it is not able to sense what's truly going on inside you at, a very deep, deepest feeling level right now. It's sensing some outward observations which are prone to error, much like we are prone to error. Now, mind you, we're getting a little closer. Things like this are reading some things that most people can't see. And as we, we now have a camera that can read heart rate variability and respiration with just a regular webcam, right? You don't have to wear any electrodes or sensors. And as we can now see that information that you and I can't see, we are getting closer to, understanding what's changing inside a person, although it's still not like a full, neuropeptide spectrum, if you will, of all the biochemical changes and, feelings that are going on inside. Well, first of all, I confirmed a lot of the usual things, which, like the commute home in Boston, big peaks, until I started consciously trying to exhale and
so
relax.
Commutes really,
Commutes usually show up as peaky. Of course, exercise is activating. What was interesting too is after exercise for a while, my levels tend to stay elevated. I can get a nice extra kick at night if I need a couple extra hours of work done and I'm fading. If I get on the exercise machine for a half hour, get real worked up, then the arousal level stays high a good bit later and I get a second wind, which is really useful sometimes. Better than doing caffeine late at night because it tapers naturally. I also had some surprises. I have 3 children, and I've noticed, for example, that on a day, I have data from a day I've shown a lot of people where I took my son to Six Flags for his birthday, and we rode this first ride that I really didn't want to go on. I'd been dragged on it before. Oh, this thing made me sick, and my levels went up really high and kind of stayed up. Then we rode my favorite roller coasters. It was the first time taking my son and his friends on roller coasters. Big peak, nice decay, like thrill followed by deep relaxation. And that was very reliable for me on the roller coasters. Now, these huge peaks happened all day at Six Flags and kind of tapered off as I ran out of steam toward the end of the day. But what surprised me was later, looking at the whole day, my biggest peak was not the biggest, fastest roller coaster in all of New England, although that was a huge peak. My biggest peak was actually getting out the door in the morning with the kids.
Kids,
Yeah, and this was an unusual one because it happened to also involve a threat that the whole event was going to be called off, and there was an asymmetry in my peaks right higher than left, which is also interesting because the right brain circuits control the right side and the left control the left at a subcortical level, these regions called the amygdala. And so we think now we can get some differential information out of the brain, not based on just my data, but based on other more extensive studies that have been done.
Crystalline water keeps coming and going in a stream